The man had been cut into two pieces, vertically, and pickled in formaldehyde. Other jars contained organs and body parts of other victims: feet, heads, internal organs, all with their labels and their nationalities. At times American, English, and Frenchman, but most of them Korean, Mongolian, and of course, Chinese. This was one of the accounts of Unit 731, a Japanese human experimentation lab once called the most unethical medical facility in the world, created in 1936. An estimate puts the death toll caused by their experiments between 200,000 to 300,000 people. Here's the chilling story of the horrors of Unit 731, one of the worst biowarfare research labs in world history. Breaches of the Hippocratic Oath were the bread and butter of Unit 731. Prisoners were received at night, usually captured by the Kempeitai, the military police of Japan. The police would telephone the special team of Unit 731 for entry. Then they transport the prisoners through a secret tunnel to the inner prisons, one of which housed women and children, and the other housing men. Doctors would take blood and stool samples, test their kidney function, and assign prisoners a number starting at 101 and ending with 1500, forever removing their names. This was the first experiment carried out psychologically instead of chemically or biologically. By dehumanizing the prisoners, Unit 731 scientists would break their wills deeply enough to prevent them from escaping. The prisoners were insulted with discriminatory names, marutas, for example, which means logs, Manchurian monkeys, Taiwanese monkeys, Formosan monkeys, or just simply monkeys. And yes, logs is in literal logs of wood. But there's actually an intriguing reason for that. Around 3,000 to 12,000 men, women, and children were experimented on within Unit 731. All under the oversight of a moral Dr. Ishishiro. The average life expectancy of a Unit 731 prisoner was 2 months, although many would survive for well over a year. Not that this mattered anyways, for reasons you'll soon discover if you keep watching. No one was safe from being taken by the Kempeitai as a test subject. Men, women, even pregnant ones and children were all possible prisoners. But what motivated the Imperial Japanese Army to kickstart this dreadful project? It was actually the Geneva Convention of 1925, which banned biological weapons. The Imperial Japanese Army believed that if these weapons had been banned, it meant that they were the most effective in war. Remain a world power, they had to be the most advanced bioweapon manufacturers in the world, and that did they achieve, for their biowarfare operations were said to be larger than France, Hungary, Italy, Poland, and the Soviet Union combined. This is why. At first, Unit 731 was called the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. Commanding officer and Dr. Ishishiro was made its leader. Shiro was a prodigy of Army Minister Sudo Araki and had already proposed the creation of a Japanese biological and chemical research unit in 1930, supposedly because Western powers were already developing their own bioweapons under wraps. This led to the Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1932, as it gave the Japanese a place to separate the research station from their homeland and access to as many Chinese people as they could get their hands on for the experiments. And oh, a separate place did they need, given the magnitude of their experiments. Thus, Unit 731 was built in the Pingfang district of Harbin, the largest city of Manchukuo. Manchukuo was a Japanese puppet state nowadays known as Northeast China. Other similar units were created around China, such as Unit 1644 in Nanking and Unit 1855 in Beijing, all with the same objective, although none as complex as Unit 731. The complex covered more than 150 buildings, inescapable due to a dry moat filled with electrified wire. It hosted thousands of containers used to raise fleas, cauldrons to produce chemicals, and recipients for biological agents. In terms of human resources, the unit was divided into 8 divisions. Division 1 researched the use of the bubonic plague, cholera, anthrax, typhoid, and tuberculosis in live human subjects. Division 2 researched biological weapons that spread parasites and germs. Division 3 the production of shells with biological agents. Division 4 bacteria mass production and storage. Division 5 was the training unit for the other units, and Division 6 through 8 were administrative. So, why were the prisoners called marutas or logs? This was actually a corporate joke by the staff because of the facility's cover story. You see, Unit 731 had been labeled as a lumber mill to the locals, so at first Chinese inhabitants were blissfully unaware of the dark secrets underneath the complex, or at least were too afraid to ask about it. What if the Kempeitai took them in their sleep to become the next number? They'd rather not ask. Ishii's own brother, Mitsuo, was the prison warden. This ensured the secrets of the experiments never leaked out, although with time it became an open secret in Manchurian society that humans were once used as experimental subjects there. So, now for the moment we've all been waiting for. What were the supposedly horrifying experiments that took place in Unit 731? Gruesome tactics for extracting body organs were performed on a daily basis with a devil-may-care attitude. If Ishishiro wanted an experiment on a human brain, then the guards would simply take a prisoner from their cell, smash their head open with an axe, extract the brain for the procedure, and send the body to the crematorium for its disposal. And be certain that almost all vivisections performed there were very lethal, and almost none were performed with an anesthetic. Some Unit 731 members even testified to having vivisected pregnant women. Their purpose was to allow the scientists to observe the real-time evolution of bacteria in their bodies. Many of these procedures were for practice rather than research of the organs, essentially training Japanese medical students. Many of them knew that if they went to China for practice back in 1940, they'd be allowed to vivisect. Limbs were amputated to better study blood loss, sometimes even reattached to the opposite side of their bodies. Other prisoners had their stomachs surgically removed, as well as parts of other organs to test out what happened to their organism. The only mercy they provide their prisoners was to stuff medical gazes onto their mouths before the vivisection, if only to prevent their agonizing screams from interrupting their work. If the human subject was too exhausted from the experiments, they just dispose of them by handing them lethal potassium cyanide tablets or porridge with diamorphine. Ironically enough, not even the members of Unit 731 themselves were immune to the experiments. Should one of them also be infected with any of the bacteria, they'd also be vivisected. Other experiments involved food and water deprivation to discover just how much it would take for someone to expire, crushing prisoners with heavy objects, electrocuting them, injecting them with horse blood, and literally burning them with flamethrowers. Oh, and here's the golden rule of Unit 731. No one was allowed to survive. Should there be a survivor, of which there was a handful from time to time of the inoculation of the lethal bacteria, then they'd just be infected with something else. First, they'd be given medical treatment that could test ways of restoring their health and soundness after infection. After all, the doctors also wanted to know ways to cure those diseases. So they were fed normally and treated well, if only for a worse fate afterward. The survivors were then prepared for the next experiment, infected with another type of germ, and if they survived even that, the process would only be repeated until they passed away. But Unit 731 experiments also took place out of the fictitious lumber mill. After all, what was a biowarfare weapons manufacturer doing if it didn't experiment with human settlements? Low-flying airplanes would hover throughout coastal Ningbo and Chande in the Hunan Province in 1940 and 1941, spraying them with bubonic plague, anthrax, and other bacteria, although the worst ones were plague-infected fleas bred in the unit's labs. They dropped flea bombs, which were bombs containing clouds of plague carrier fleas. Researchers would approach moribund villagers to test their effectiveness. This was where the real bloodbath took place. While the experimented prisoners were eliminated in the thousands, the biological warfare operations racked up casualties 10 times that amount. Other members of Unit 731 made trips to Nanjing to spread typhoid and paratyphoid germs everywhere they could. Into the wells, in people's houses, and even in snacks that they'd maliciously hand to the locals. Chillingly enough, it was this little trial that helped them conclude how paratyphoid fever was the most effective of all pathogens. These attacks were double-edged swords, as they also led to the demise from cholera of many unwary Japanese troops who had not been prepared themselves for the consequences of their bioweapons. Of all these insights would lead to Unit 731 planning to infest San Diego and California with the plague through kamikaze pilots, Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night. The plan, though, never took place due to Japan's surrender. Did you know that frozen arms sound like a board when struck with a short stick? That was actually one of Army engineer Hisato Yoshimura's insights from his experiments. Of all the Army doctors present in the unit, none were as strict nor as cold-blooded as him. He was so sadistic that he even unnerved the other cold-blooded members of the unit. Once, he put 2 men without clothes in 40 to 50 degrees below zero areas and filmed it until they passed, relishing in how the subjects agonized so much that they dig their nails into each other's flesh. He even once put 20 children and a 3-day-old baby in freezing salt water. Possibly the worst of it all was the forced infection of syphilis between patients. Unit members would force female and male prisoners into a cell and force them to engage in carnal acts under duress of being shot. After infection, they'd be vivisected to observe their organs change while the syphilis infection progressed. Some female prisoners were forced to be pregnant for far worse experiments. For better or worse, the flimsy scientific foundations of the Unit 731 experiments limited the effectiveness of their results. So, one could say that in the end, most of it was all for nothing. A professor at Osaka University watched footage from the human experiments and executions from Unit 731 and claimed some of these experiments were just the scientists playing around with innocence and provided zero advancements to medicine or germ warfare. By the time World War II ended, all prisoners were gassed or fed poison, and Dr. Ishishiro ordered every member of the group to vanish and take their secret to the grave, giving them cyanide vials in case they were captured. Skeleton crews of the Japanese troops in the unit blew up the complex to destroy evidence. There were no repercussions. While German nationalist social doctors and scientists were persecuted for their horrifying experiments in concentration camp inmates, no one involved in the experiments of Unit 731 was punished for their crimes. The US government helped cover up these war crimes by giving these perpetrators, including Japanese Emperor Hirohito and Ishishiro, immunity in exchange for US access to Unit 731 research. Instead of punishment, they were rewarded with careers in various scientific fields. The Chinese families were left in the mourning for their loved ones' lives, while those affected by the bacterial attacks in their villages had to deal with the horrifying consequences for many years to come.